Hi folks, thought it was about time I did another video because I haven't done one for a while. But rather than showing off my progress on my latest project, something that's given me food for thought on why I have the projects I have and what makes me stick with them, or in some cases, what it is that makes me put them to one side and not revisit them. So let's see if I can give you guys some similar food for thought. So, I'm a wargamer. Aren't we all? That's why you're watching this channel, hopefully. Anyway, it's a multifaceted hobby, and each gamer has got a different facet, or more than one facet, that keeps them interested and keeps them hooked. Some are more painters and collectors, some are just competitive gamers and hopefully get other people to paint their models for them, who knows. But historical gaming, for example, can involve lots of research, and that itself is a hobby. And sci-fi fantasy gamers are often in love with and immersed in the fiction that supports the game that they play, and or is inspired by it, or it itself inspired the game. So there's lots of different reasons. But what draws you in and keeps you there? What can generate that enthusiasm and, more importantly, sustain it? With its roots in a small boy's love of toy soldiers and his granddad's war stories, along with comics, movies, fiction, and a love of history at school, and more, my own gaming takes in a variety of projects. Originally a historical gamer, I've veered towards sci-fi and fantasy before coming back the other way, but nowadays both sci-fi, fantasy and historical things hold my attention. The amount of time I've spent gaming, painting, planning and everything else, along with chewing the fat with fellow hobbyists, has varied over the years as well. I've got gaming clubs where I can roll dice for most of my gaming interests amongst some like-minded friends. And the internet helps as well, with things like YouTube, Facebook, WhatsApp and Discord all supplementing the flow of the hobby juices. Coming back to what I started talking about, however, what hooks you in and keeps you there? And how do you spot something that may not last? Consider the humble Venn diagram. Multiple factors are represented and one tries to get as close to that sweet spot where they all intersect as possible. The headliners, which each cover a number of things, for me are as follows. Firstly, models and the visual appeal. Secondly, painting and modelling, which I differ from point number one for a couple of reasons. Then you've got background and fluff, either historical or fictional. The gameplay, how are the rules? Opponent availability, and last of all, economy, because at the end of the day we've got to pay for this hobby out of our pockets. Now some of those are quite closely linked, but each for me warrants its own separate inclusion. In the past I've been accused of being a bit of a hobby butterfly, flitting from project to project. Certainly during the period of time in which I played 40k to the exclusion of a lot of other games, despite maintaining interest in those other things, I stuck to 2 or 3 armies for a long time, but then, I forget what the decision-making logic was, if there was any, I sold them all and started again. And then for the remainder of that period of time I spent playing Warhammer 40,000, I sort of regularly changed my mind on the thing I was collecting, for a number of reasons really. So clearly there was something about each army and project I had during that time that didn't really hook me in. There was a couple of occasions where I had to sell something for financial reasons, either to support myself or, in the case of an army I sold earlier this year, help support my daughter who's in a bit of financial bother. But anyway, number of reasons. So let's look at them each one by one. Firstly, models and visual appeal. Now, wargaming for me is a very visual hobby, and a project would not have lasting appeal if I didn't like the look of the models and their setting. I've got to have models that appeal to me. And also, having nice scenery and tables to play on is cool, so a good gaming club or a nice collection at home certainly helps. Secondly, painting and modelling. Allied to the previous category, you've got to be able to want to sit and glue models together, spend hours painting them, etc. That's not for some, but it's a big part of it for me. I'm not the best painter, but I enjoy it, and that's the main thing. But I'm not going to enjoy it if it's something I don't feel enthusiasm for, either in terms of the individual subject matter at hand, or as a topic activity in the first place. Next up, background and fluff. The historical or fictional background of a force and the stories relating thereto can be a significant motivating force behind wanting to collect and game with it. Take, for example, an Ancients player wanting a Carthaginian army to recreate Hannibal crossing the Alps. A Napoleonic gamer wanting to recreate a particular campaign or see if he can do better at Waterloo than Napoleon did. Or a Tolkien fan who loves the stories of the Riders of Rohan he read in Lord of the Rings and wants to play on a tabletop with them. And that sort of thing. Reading and researching as well can be an absorbing hobby in its own right. So background and supporting fictional material or supporting historical material can be a big factor. Gameplay. Now, the actual playing of games and the enjoyment derived from it owes a lot to the game's rules. Simple rules can make a game flow well and help the players have fun, but for some, this can detract from the realism and the fun because they prefer their rules to be more detailed and realistic. I understand both points of view, and each has their place, but I certainly find myself more on the quick and fun side of the fence, because at the end of the day it's all about having a bit of a laugh with your friends and your toy soldiers. Others may not see it like that, however. Opponent availability. It's all very well painting models with a view to playing games with them, but if no one else you know plays the game, you're not going to get very far. Yes, there is a thriving solo wargames community, and many people do have fun with that. However, gaming clubs and shops with gaming spaces can certainly help, because as well as being a visual hobby, it's certainly a sociable one. At the end of the day, you've got to spend time rolling dice with somebody at the other side of the table from you. And where else is better than a gaming club to do that sort of thing? However, it may well be there may be all the gaming clubs in the world, but nobody interested in the game you want to play. So that's certainly something you need to consider. Who else plays it? Last, but by no means least, economy. Now let's face it, this is often not a very cheap hobby. This does depend on how far you take it or what games you play. But it can get expensive. Somebody might counter that argument with, well, I only play skirmish games, I only need a few models per side, and that's fine. However, equally so, there are plenty of games that involve lots of models or expensive setups in some way, shape or form. People on limited budgets can struggle if their interests take them toward a game or an army within that game that's expensive or needs lots of models. Just recently, I've painted lots of medieval models for the 100 Years' War. Some absolutely fantastic models, and I really enjoyed painting them. The joy of having a wonderful sculpted model in your hands, painting it and seeing reasonable results. It looks great, and it's a lot of satisfaction. The history is quite interesting too, and I've learnt a lot. However, I don't know anyone else locally to me that plays it. And I don't have a lot of experience with the most popular rule set for the period. I mean, granted, the manufacturer of the lovely models I've painted recently are coming out with their own rules shortly that are being play tested at the moment. Perhaps they'll be great. I don't know. We'll wait and see. Contrast that, for example, with Wars of the Roses, something that has also been on my channel a fair bit, although albeit some time ago, slightly later in medieval history. I know a couple of people who play that, and I find myself more brought into the history of it, perhaps because it's, specifically here in this country, in England. Not that the history of other aspects of medieval warfare and so on isn't interesting, it's just I find myself more brought into that. The models are also a little cheaper too if one looks at the Perry's plastics. On a slightly different note, there's one Games Workshop game I used to enjoy immensely, was the Old Fantasy Battle. And whilst its successor, Age of Sigmar, is quite fun, my daughter and I play it together, I miss the Old Fantasy Battle, the visual appeal of the armies with big blocks of infantry, the background, the fluff, enjoyable nature and familiar nature of the gaming, and the enjoyable nature of the modelling. It really calls to me. And recently, a YouTube and Discord gaming acquaintance of mine started a 6th edition Warhammer Fantasy Army. The same army that I've also recently started, because a local gaming group of mine have started a 6th edition Warhammer revival. So just coincidence that both myself and this YouTube acquaintance of mine have started at the same time. Several local gaming friends of mine have started and going retro with it all, and there's I was invited to join in, so there's a great deal of local opponents for me for it. Sadly, it's not cheap, as tagging something as retro seems to hugely inflate the price. I can barely recall something exciting me so much, though, about a project. So look out for lots of updates for that on my YouTube channel soon, as well as the Wars of the Roses stuff. And looking at my other gaming projects, there are other things that I often come back to, whereas others come and go and are rarely at all, if at all, revisited. Those regulars are the ones that are closer to that sweet spot of our hypothetical Venn diagram. And the fact that others aren't, because they miss out on some of those 6 factors I mentioned, are perhaps why they end up getting shelved and perhaps discontinued. That's not to say any of the things I've done I've not enjoyed. I've just not enjoyed some of them for as many reasons, and thus that's the reason they don't get revisited. Now, sorry for the lengthy waffle. It was just something that I've been thinking about lately, and I hope it's given you guys food for wargaming thought too. Chances are you ask the same question to 10 different gamers and you'll get 10 different answers, but these are my thoughts about it. If it makes you think about it, then, you know, cool. I'd welcome your comments and suggestions. Thanks for watching. See you all soon.